On April 18, 1938, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster would create an iconic legend. In the pages of Action Comics #1, their creation Superman, the character they had been trying to get on print for 6 years, would finally come to fruition and usher in the golden age of not only comic books, but we consider the birth of a superhero. In this edition of Tony's Comic Spotlight, the spotlight shines on Action Comics #1. So first, before I start talking about the main story that we're all here for, which is the birth of Superman, I want to touch base with some of the other stories that are in this book. Action Comics started out as an anthology series, and I believe there's like 8 or 9 stories in this book. So I'm going to touch base a little bit on the other stories, and then we'll move on to the main event. So story number 2 is called Chuck Dawson. It was written by H. Fleming. About this kid that goes back to this town of Red Gulch to get revenge on the murder of his father from this outfit called the AG Gang. They're a bunch of cattle ranch owners that had basically killed his father and took their land. And this is his journey to try to avenge the death of his father and reclaim their land. Story number 3 is called Zatara, Master Magician by Fred Gardner. And basically it's about a master magician named Zatara and his companion Tone, who try to stop his enemy Tigress and her gang from robbing a train that's got $200,000 worth of loot. It's a pretty good story, and the fact that later on, this is Zatara's first appearance, and you will find out later on in another comic that Zatara is the father of DC Comics character Zatanna, which is pretty cool. The 4th story is just basically like a 2-page like little novel thing. It's called The South Sea Strategy by Captain Frank Thomas. It's a little 2-page novel story about a captain named Brett Coleman and his companion Cotton Ball. They've loaded up their boat and they're headed to Singapore, but they find this man in the water and they pull him out, and kind of find out that he was on this island with his daughter and somebody else, and the natives of the island reached out and they killed the companion and took his daughter captive, and they thought he was dead too, but he saw the captain's boat and swam out to it to try to get aid, and they're going to go save this woman. Story number 5 is your typical newspaper comic story. It's called Sticky Mitt Stimson. It's by somebody named Alger. But it's just a regular story similar to those what you find in a newspaper. And he's trying to escape from the law after stealing some apples. It's pretty much, and it's a pretty funny little comic. Story number 6 is The Adventures of Marco Polo by Savin Elvin. And it's about a 17-year-old Marco Polo and his father. They're sent on an expedition to the Orient, and they're given some gifts and 2 priests by the Pope to go to this place called, or they're supposed to be going to this kingdom ran by this Khan of Tartari or something like that, and to help. It's like a peacekeeping initiative. I know I probably said that name wrong, but they get ambushed and they have to fight. First they take off on ships, and then after they retreat from some Babylonians, they go across land and run into some issues. But I believe it's continued after this one. But you know, it seemed like it was all right. 7th story is called Pep Morgan, and it's by Fred Gardner, and it's about this boxer named Pep who is in a match for the light heavyweight championship. He defeats Sailor Sorensen to win the title. Even though he was blinded during the fight, they find out that the doctor that was working with Sorensen had put something on the gloves that made him blind, but he was still able to win the fight. And they exposed the doctor, and he ran off. And then 6 months later, Pep and his trainer are watching TV, and they see this footage of a new boxer that's being led by the same doc, and they call him Boomerang. He's from Australia. They call him, he's got a nickname called the Wild Bushman. He's tearing through the ranks, and there's a match between him and somebody. I forgot who the name of the guy was, but Pep and them go check out the match, and they know there's no way that the guy just dropped after so many rounds, and they're like, there's no way that guy threw that match. And when this Boomerang guy fights Pep for the title, they find out that, Pep beats him, but they find out that he has some kind of hypodermic needle inside of his the end of his boxing glove or something, and he's able to scrape, like he scrapes their forehead or something. It'll knock him out, and that's how he can win these matches. So the Doc goes to jail. The 8th story is called Scoop's Gammon, and it's by Will Eiley. And basically, it's Scoop and his partner cover a story about a jewel thief that's being flown in, and when the jewel thief plane that holds the jewel thief gets there, they're there to report the story, and this group of thugs show up with Tommy guns, and they help him escape, and Scoop basically helps the police recapture the guy. The 9th story is called Tex Thompson by Bernard Bailey, and it says Tex is visiting England, where he meets a young boy named Robert. The two discover a dead body, and then when Robert runs off to alert the authorities, this woman shows up out of nowhere and thinks that Tex had killed the person. And when the cop gets there, she tells the sheriff that, hey, this guy killed this person, and I watched him do it. Of course, she's lying. The cop Tex punches the cop and runs away, but he's able to backtrack and follow the girl to this abandoned cabin or something, and she gets there, and there's a group of other people there with the kid that captured Robert on his way, and there's this grand scheme to convict or to throw the blame of the murder of this guy onto Tex, because he was the next person that passed by and found the body. Robert was able to get away, and he's on his way to go get help, and he finds it, and this other girl shows up, and the girl goes to the cops and gets help while he doubles back and helps Tex. And when it's all over with, the cops show up. They're able to round up the girl and the gang. Tex is, his innocence is proven. They go to give him a reward for the capture of the gang, but he gives it to the kid and the girl. And the funny thing is this is Tex Thompson's first appearance in this book, and he would later on become Mr. Marvel. I believe it was Mr. Marvel, or no, Mr. America, and then later on become the Americommando. As a distant planet is destroyed, later revealed to be planet Krypton, a scientist placed his infant son within a spaceship and sends it towards Earth. On Earth, the ship crashes and is found by a passing motorist who takes the infant to an orphanage. The attendants at the orphanage are astounded to see the child's physical structure and his incredible feats of strength. Growing up, Clark Kent realizes that he has far greater powers than mortal men, and decides to dedicate his life and the use of his powers to champion the oppressed as Superman. When he reaches maturity, he discovers he can easily leap 1/8 of a mile, or basically hurdle over a 20-story building. He can raise tremendous amounts of weight and is faster than an express train. As the story begins, Superman leaves a tied and gagged woman beside a tree at the governor's estate. Going to the door, Superman demands to see the governor, but the butler refuses. Superman knocks the door down, picking up the butler with ease, and goes up the stairs. The butler laughs as Superman discovers the door is locked and made of steel. But Superman rips the door from its hinges, startling the governor and the butler, who produces a gun and tries to shoot Superman, but the bullets bounce off. Superman says they are about to execute Evelyn Curry of murder in 15 minutes, but he has a signed confession from the real killer. After the governor sees Superman's proof, he calls the prison and pardons Evelyn, ending the execution, and Superman tells the governor that he has the person responsible for the actual murder tied up on his estate. The next morning, Clark Kent is headed for work at the Daily Star as a reporter and sees someone reading a newspaper. He picks up the paper, and the front page is about the events of the following night, and he's happy to see that he was not mentioned. At work, his boss puts him Clark on the Superman story, in which Clark says if he can't find out anything about Superman, no one can. Clark overhears about domestic abuse going on at 211 Court Avenue and arrives at Superman, and he sees a man beating his wife with a belt. He picks up the man and throws him against the wall. The man tries to stab Superman, but the blade breaks on Superman's chest. Superman threatens the man, who simply faints. He changes back to his civilian identity and waits for the cops to arrive. Back at the Daily Star, Clark asks Lois out on a date, and even though she doesn't really want to, she accepts. On the date, the two are dancing when this gangster named Butch Morgan cuts in. Clark backs down, not wanting to expose a secret identity, but this enrages Lois, who leaves and gets in the cab. And as Clark comes to the cab wanting to know what's wrong, Lois calls him a spineless, undesirable coward. As the cab speeds off, Mason vows revenge on Lois and follows her in another car, but not realizing that he too is being watched by Superman. Butch and his goons run Lois's taxi off the road and take her prisoner, but as they speed away, they see a figure standing in the road directly in front of them. The driver guns the car, but Superman leaps over it. He then turns back and chases the car, catching and picking it up with ease. He shakes the car until all the occupants fall out, and then smashes the car into bits in that iconic cover shot that we all know and love. He easily catches up to Butch and leaves him hanging on a highline pole. He tells Lois she need not be afraid of him, and he flies her to safety. The next morning, she tells the chief that she saw Superman, but he doesn't believe her, and she treats Clark colder than ever. The chief assigns Clark to go to a South American town called San Monte as a news correspondent to cover the war going on there, but Clark, for some reason, takes a train to Washington, D.C. Never really says why he went to D.C., but anyway, Clark attends a session of Congress and watches Senator Barrows speak. Leaving the chambers, Clark snaps a pic of the senator talking to a strange fellow. At a local D.C. newspaper, the man is revealed to be Alex Greer, a big-time lobbyist. 8:30 that night, Superman eavesdrops outside Senator Barrows' residence, where he hears the man striking a deal with Barrows, and Barrows tells him that legislation will be passed where they will go to war with Europe for some reason. This pleases the man, who promises to pay Barrows a hefty sum and to protect him financially. As Greer is leaving, he is confronted by Superman and denies everything, but Superman grabs him and leaps onto a highline wire and runs up to the Capitol, where they're overlooking the Capitol and scaring the guy. He takes off jumping for another building, and basically that's where the story ends. You don't know anything that happens, and I guess it's continued on, and that is the end of the first appearance of Superman. Okay, so there are a few things I wanted to note, little subtle differences from Action Comics and the way Superman is regarded to now as far as his origin goes. In this original story in Action Comics #1, Superman wasn't found by Ma and John Kent. It just simply says that he was found by a passing motorist and taken to an orphanage. Of course, we all know now, when we look at Superman's origin, he was found by Mom, Paul Kent, and raised as their own. But they actually, John and Martha Kent don't actually first appear until Superman gets his own story his own comic in 1939, Superman #1. Also, the planet is just referred to as an exploding planet, his birthplace. It's not actually called Krypton until Superman #1. The Daily Star is the name of the paper that he works for in Action Comics #1, but it would later be changed to the Daily Planet. And it says that he could leap 1/8 of a mile. He could, he had super strength. He was faster, more powerful than a locomotive. What's interesting, though, is that his skin was basically bulletproof. If any small arms fire is fine, would just bounce off of him. But if it was an exploding grenade shell, like an exploding shell, that would actually hurt him, which is interesting because, you know, when he was first portrayed, he had weaknesses, which is interesting. And this was not the first time that, you know, Siegel and Schuster tried to make a character for Superman. Back in 1932, I don't remember the name of the magazine, but they released a little story called The Reign of the Superman, and it was about a mad scientist that was trying to take over the world. That was the first incarnation of Superman. So basically, when they first created him, he was a villain, and then through modifications and changes, he would become the Superman that we know. And I just thought some of those little trivias you might find interesting, or you may have already known them. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tony's Comics Spotlight, featuring a spotlight on Action Comics #1. If you're enjoying the content, please give us a like and subscribe. And also, I'm going to post in the link below some channels that you should also check out as well. And I'll see you next time for the next Tony's Comics Spotlight. See you.